So the wampum can be viewed as a sacred material to the Eastern nations. It's a mnemonic device. You have various elements in the belt that would record important events that happen within that nation. They hold the memory. And it's something that was used as a form of gift giving. It was used to propose marriage, to declare war, to maintain peace. They would have gatherings. For example, say in Muncie, Delaware, they had belts that were associated with various leaders. And each time a leader within the community died, they would come together and they would bring out all the belts and they would read the belts from previous leaders, from previous generations. And it could take days to go through these belts. These aren't just relics of the past, they are used nowadays. A good example is that they are used in land claims to support land claims with the various governments. So they are still relevant and important in the communities. Even if the belts themselves aren't necessarily in the community, the stories to the belts are still really important to the community members, to the descendants, and to the families. The belts typically would have been wrapped in hide. They would have been folded or rolled, and that's generally how they would have been stored. And they would have been in environments that, especially as you get closer to the coast, would have been very high humidity. Belts like this, in conservation, they're called composite objects. So they're made up of various different materials. So you have the threading materials. A lot of times it's hide, so it could be deer tan hide. You've got, sometimes it's sinew that is used to thread the beads, sometimes it's bass fiber, so it could be from stinging nettle or slippery elm. And then you have the shells, which are also organic materials because they do come from the northern quahog mollusks and from the whelk shells. So within museums, the acceptable range for the relative humidity is about 40 to 60%. Give or take a couple degrees within that range. And that's generally because you do have a lot of composite objects, you have a lot of different materials. And so the 40 to 60 range is deemed acceptable. So you don't want to go really high with the humidity because then you're going to have the threading materials. You're going to have the hide and the threading materials rot away. But if the humidity is too low, then you start drying out the beads and you'll have the beads starting to crack and trying to break. So you're trying to find a balance that works for all elements of a belt if you're looking at it from a conservation perspective. But within community, while they were being used, they would have been handled by various people. They would have been put over the shoulder and hung. They would have been around the neck, completely against what we within institutions would think in terms of best museum practices. But it's how the belts were interacted with within communities. But their care with the belts were different than in the museums. They were totally fine with making the repairs. Within museums, you try to avoid introducing new materials to a historical object. One of the things that I would do would actually go to Penobscot and to ask how they would actually like the belts to be cared for. And this is something that, because these again are considered to be living beings, they're living history, and it's really important to have the community's input and the consultation process to be carried out with them. Our stories and our objects have been told for us and cared for us for so many generations because the attitudes were that we know what's best for the objects. The institutions would say, we know what's best. You have this big push towards decolonization and reconciliation. The best way to do that is to involve the communities and to listen to the communities as to what they consider decolonization and reconciliation, and to collaborate with source communities is really important because just the sheer knowledge that the community has. The most important knowledge is from those community members. And to change the attitudes with institutions, from owners of objects to custodians of collections. And when you talk about preservation for future generations, you have to question, is that what the intention was for the object? Because we have a tendency within society to want to preserve everything of the past, but that isn't necessarily what that object was intended to do. It may have been intended to return to the earth at some point. So we're going completely against what the intention of the maker and the community and the object was in our goal to preserve the past. We don't get to make the call on that, though. We as conservators or the institution shouldn't be the one making the call on that. It should be the community that makes the call on whether or not something should be preserved. Should it be treated? Should it be on display? Should it be in storage? How should it be in storage? So those are things that I think are really, again, really important to why it's so important to talk to the community.